Hello there. Today we are going to be making pocket face mask. This pattern been modified, and what's good about this mask is that it has a wire on top, which we actually used pipe cleaner. This way it would go very tightly. It can go very tightly around nose area, and also it has the pocket on inside of the lining where additional filters could be inserted. To begin, we have to cut the fabrics out. So in this case, you're gonna need to have a fabric for outer mask and for inside as a liner. For outer layer, it's good to use fabrics that are polyester or polycotton blend, and preferably in a dark colors. For inside of the layer, as you see, there's two parts to the to this liner. This is where the pocket's going to be. You have to cut two of each, obviously. In this case, what we used cotton flannel for the inside. Okay, so those are two pieces that we need. Also, we're going to need elastic. If you have elastic, it's 1/4 inch width, and each of them has to be cut at 6.5 inches long. And another thing we're going to need is a pipe cleaner. In this case, I just took a regular length pipe cleaner, actually 2 masks. It can be used for 2 masks. So what we're going to do, we're going to fold it into halfway, and then we're going to snip it. Please do not use fabric scissors for this, use pliers. So there. So one can go aside, and the other one, the next thing you have to do, you have to take a little bit at the top, fold it in, and tighten it or twist it as much as you can so that the sharp edge is going to be hidden. Same thing we're going to do on this side, and our pipe cleaner is ready. We will begin by running a stitch right here at the outer edge of the face mask. For that, we have to pin this edge. So remember, whenever you pin, you always pin beginning, end, and the middle, and always perpendicular to the seam. And we are going to run a seam of 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. We also have to stitch our lining side pieces together. For that, as you see, this is one side and 2 parts of it. So we're gonna match the double notches with the top part of the mask. You're going to layer right sides together, aligning your notches. And we are going to pin, just 2 pins probably is fine. And it's good to mark on a lower part of the notch. Just extend this line so you can see it clearly. This is a wonderful pen, actually. It's a erasable pen which disappears when you iron. And I'm going to also mark the bottom. And what we're going to do, repeat the same thing on this layer, obviously, but what we're going to do is we're going to stitch it with a reinforcement at the top and at the bottom of the line. You're going to skip this, leave that open, and then we're going to do the same thing here. You can just do it in one seam forward and backwards, so it's both ends reinforced. Remember, keeping this open, and then repeat the same thing on this side. As you've seen, I stitched just the top portions of the lining, attaching 2 parts of it together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to iron the seams open like this on both ends, both sides of the lining. So ironing these seams open, and then after we will iron them open, as you see there's going to be an opening, we are going to zigzag right along this 2 sides of this lining. This is what it's going to look like once you press the seams open and zigzag right along the edge. See? There you go. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to join this on this side, just like we've done right here. So what we will do is we will put these two lines together again. They should match perfectly because they've been cut together. And again, we pin the top, we pin the bottom, and we pin in the center. And what we're going to do, we are going to stitch this again at 3/8. As you see, I've done it here. What's important to note, I probably should have said at the beginning, is that the seam allowance all around this mask are exactly 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. Okay, now that we've done those seams, instead of just ironing that seam open, what we're going to do is we are going to push the seam allowance to one side, making sure that seam is opening tightly like this, right to the maximum, and we are going to top stitch right along the seam. Okay, with making sure that we have seam allowance on one side and keeping them down with the top stitch. We're going to do that on both lining and self, the outer edge. As I mentioned before, I want you to top stitch this seam. So you are going to go on the right side of the fabric, push all the seam allowances to the right side like this, and we are going to top stitch it right here. So what I usually do, I align my foot with the seam and make sure that all the seam allowance are turned to the right, and also make sure that you're opening your seam to the maximum. So we're going to start by reinforcing, and as you see, I'm just opening the seam. I'm getting inside, making sure my seam allowance to the right, and I'm going to stitch it like this. Go slow because it's a curve, it's not just a flat seam. And to the end, and reinforce. And this is what it looks like on this side, and this is what it looks like on the wrong side. And here what this is gonna look like. As you see, I've done a seam, pushing the seam allowance to my right, and stitched it right on top, making sure that the seam is very well open. Okay, I did it on both ends, on both layers, as you see right here. So now what we have to do, both layers are ready to put together. So you're going to put right sides together like this, making sure that you align the top and the bottoms. Okay, the top is a bit more higher and this is more straighter. So now when you're gonna start aligning this, let me just cut this off. When you're going to start aligning this, the first thing you want to do is you want to align the seams right in the center. So aligning the seam, pinning it, go to this side, do the same thing, pin it. And now what you do is you're going to align these edges together. They're supposed to match perfectly like that. Pin this edge in between and continue all around. So as you see, I pinned this mask together, avoiding the edges, but they're supposed to align. What's important to note is that outer layer of the mask is slightly bigger than the inside. This is so that when everything is turned inside, there's no too much bulk in the lining. Okay, so and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to run 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch on the top of the mask and the bottom of the mask. this is what it's going to look like. So as you've seen, I run a seam of 1 centimeter on this side and 1 centimeter on the side. What's important is to make sure you have reinforcement at the beginning and the end. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to create a little channel, a little like a casing, inseam casing for our pipe cleaner, which is going to go on top of the nose area. You see, this is more flatter, this is more pointier, so that's the top. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to run a seam about a 1/4 inch away from the seam, the original seam that I've done before. What's also important is that I'm going to mark myself. Usually what I do is, you see the seam on the lining over here? So this is where I'm going to start, and this is where I'm going to end it. It's important to mark it like this. It's not necessary to be exact placement, but it's kind of good marker for you. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to run exactly a 1/4 inch seam away from this seam that I've done before. And this is what it looks like. As you see, I've done a seam. It's approximately 1/4 inch away from the seam that I originally did. Okay, now this is the pipe cleaner. Remember, we prepared with the folded edges. Now what we're going to do is we are going to insert this pipe cleaner. It's quite simple to insert because it's nice, it slides in very nicely. It gets a bit stubborn at the seam, but you can just use it as a sort of a same as a safety pin, then you put through. So push it through. By the way, yeah, so if you divided the original pipe cleaner into, this is exactly the length that you're going to get. So now, as you see, we have a pipe cleaner right at the top of the nose area, right there. And what we're going to do now, so this is ready. What you can do right away, if you want to, you can just stitch it over here to lock it in, just two kind of a bar tacks here and there, or we can do them after. Now that this is done, what we're going to do is we will take our elastics that we prepared right here. I'm going to start one at a time. You want to fold this elastic like this so that there's no any like twists happening. Okay, we want to fold it this way, and then you will put them in. First, you're going to put this one inside this area, so you move it up and you move this one down. I just kind of keep my fingers on top of them so they don't twist around. You're going to take safety pin. You're going to take pins and you're going to pin one in here where this elastic is, and then you are going to pin this elastic. If it's being stubborn, just push it. What you want to do, you want to push it all the way to the seam there, like this. And as I mentioned to you before, remember, lining is slightly shorter than the outer edge, as you see. You see, we have a bubble, and that's why what you want to do when you stitch, we want to stitch on top of the lining and not on top of this outer edge. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and I will stitch a seam again of 1 centimeter seam allowance with reinforcement at the top and reinforcement at the bottom. And I will repeat the same thing on this side. So as I've said before, I stitch this down with elastics sticking out here, and the same thing I repeat it right here. Actually, you can see it better from this side. Now what I've also done is what I mentioned before is I did a little bar tack to keep the pipe cleaner inside and prevent it from slipping out. The best part about this, everything is done in one shot, and now all we have to do is turn it right side out. So now through those slits, we're going to turn our mask right side out. The good thing about it is this mask is done without any use or need to use a serger or even ironing. Actually, we've done everything without using an iron. so far. Oh, except for maybe the opening of the slits, yes. So now, as you see, here's our little mask. Here's the pipe cleaner sitting there nice and tight, not moving anywhere. So you can also, to finish it off, if you want, you can do top stitching, a 1/4 inch top stitch all around, just to keep it from opening, or like rolling the seams, right? Or what you can do is giving it a nice press iron so that it stays nice and tight. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and make sure that I open my seams right to the maximum, and I'm going to run a 1/4 inch top stitch all around my mask. Keep in mind there's a pipe cleaner over here, so you really don't want your machine to hit the metal, okay? So be conscious of it as you're stitching around it. And here's the final product completed. As you've seen, I just did 1/4 inch seam allowance as a top stitch all around, and the mask is done with a nice little wire here. So thanks so much for watching. Please comment or contact us if you have questions or any concerns. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and so on.